Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right, the podcast for those who are uncertain. My name is Kat, I'm your host. For today's episode, we're going to talk about how you shouldn't make seeking contentment your purpose or identity because you won't ever find it if that's the case. And this is something that I've had to actually work on a lot in therapy recently. Because I feel like those of us who are always seeking contentment in life, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, right? But I think if you make it your purpose internally to always be seeking contentment, always be seeking relief from the discontentment of life. If that's your identity, if that's what you think is what drives you every single day, the reason you wake up in the morning, you're never actually going to find it, because to constantly be seeking means to not have, right? So if your identity is to be seeking contentment, then even if you are in a place in your life where things are content for you, you will always find some sort of dissatisfaction because you're forcing yourself to be the kind of person who always seeks contentment. I hope that makes sense. But it's important to be mindful of this, right? Because you're never going to actually let yourself enjoy life if that's the purpose behind why you wake up in the morning. And this is something that I've caught myself doing. And it can be very insidious, very sinister. You don't realize it. And this is why people say, practice gratitude. And it never really resonated with me when people say that. Like, I understand what that means, to be grateful for the things in your life, obviously. Yeah, important, makes sense. But to really understand it, or really, to really understand what that means in terms of why it's important in your life, this is how I've started understanding it. This is what it makes sense the most for me. It's recognizing that contentment is not something that you find, it's something that you decide to have right now. And obviously, that can be really difficult because life is shitty sometimes. Our circumstances are not perfect. They never will be perfect. We can be in really awful circumstances and want to get out of them. And that's valid, right? Like, you don't have to sit in and suffer and be happy about that. So it's really hard to just be content in your current circumstances and to find gratitude in them when they suck, right? But the catch-22 is that if you are always seeking contentment, if you're always seeking it, right? The operative word being seeking, you'll never find it because it will always be elusive, simply because you've made it something that you have to chase. You've made it something in your mind that you can never have, or you can have it, but in this fantasy future, right? This fantasy idealized future of what things would look like when everything's perfect and content and I have no anxiety now, So that's the only place it can be found in your mind, which obviously is impossible because things will never be perfect. Things will never be, free of anxiety and discontentment and, struggle, because that's life, right? Life is always going to have those things. It's going to have the good and the bad. The two go hand in hand. So you can't have a part of life or an existence that is free of all awful things all the time. It's impossible. And I think while that is sad to understand and recognize, it's also very liberating because, at least for me, it's made me realize like, oh no, so contentment can be found. It's just that you choose to have it right now. You choose it now. You choose to look at your circumstances as they are, even if they're uncomfortable, even if they're not ideal, which I know is very difficult. So and I'm not trying to negate anybody's struggles and how awful things might be. But you look at all that stuff right now and you accept them. You accept them for what they are. And you accept yourself for what you are in all your imperfection, in, your least ideal form, maybe. You accept it all for what it is and decide that you're okay. And that is so difficult. It's the hardest thing to do, actually, I think. It's the one thing that I think I've circled through in therapy so many times and have understood but never really fully been able to implement because it's so difficult. Because I think societally and culturally, we are conditioned to always be seeking out a point in time in our lives where we can just be, where everything's happy, everything's perfect. We maybe work really, really hard to get to a point where everything's good, or we are always seeking out the perfect relationship or a new relationship to make us feel good and, find some relief from the discontentment of life. But it doesn't exist, right? That relief of discontentment, of discomfort does not exist. And that's okay. Because if it doesn't exist, and you will always feel that way in some way or another, right? Not always at the same level, but if it'll always be there, and you can still find contentment because you choose to, that's actually really great, right? Like that actually gives you so much more power than you think you have. At least I feel this way, because I think I can lose my sense of power. I can feel very powerless when I think of having to chase contentment, that I can never find it, or that it's always elusive, or it can only be found in this fantasy future. To realize that actually you can just choose to be content. It gives you so much more power over your life and over the way you see things and experience things. But again, easier said than done. But if you have it in your mind that contentment can only be chased, that you wake up every day, the reason I wake up every day is to make my life as, stress-free and anxiety-free and perfect as possible, the irony is that you'll never find contentment, because your identity is not, oh, I'm someone who has found contentment. I'm someone who experiences contentment. Your identity is someone who is seeking contentment, right? It's such a minute difference, and it's just one word, but it changes a lot. It changes the way you see the world. So I think it's really important to change that perspective from I'm seeking to I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing contentment, despite how, uncomfortable, painful, how much struggle is in life, and how, not ideal my circumstances are. I'm experiencing contentment. I am someone who experiences contentment. Again, easier said than done. It's even uncomfortable for me to say it because it doesn't feel true, right? But I think the more you practice it, the more you let yourself sit in that feeling, sit in that experience, the easier and more true it feels over time. But I know this is something that I think a lot of us struggle with, because we're always trying to be in a place where things feel okay. And one thing I've had to actually come to terms with is, what if things are never okay, quote unquote, right? Because what does okay really mean? You can be okay now, despite things being not okay around you. You can still find joy and love and pleasure in ways that could be so tiny, but still have an important and big impact on you. And again, this isn't me trying to promote like this toxic positivity of like, you can always be happy. You just choose to be happy, because life sucks sometimes, right? It really does. Things happen that are very stressful, but there are small things that can bring a little bit of joy if you allow yourself to see them that way, right? And it does have to do with like the perception that you allow yourself to have. It can be as simple as, for me at least, letting myself sit down and read a book. Like, I really love reading books, and that can be a simple joy, a simple pleasure. But sometimes we forget to see those things like that. Or even just eating something that's delicious. Or just, going outside and looking up at the sky. Like, that's a simple pleasure, I think, at least. And we don't often let ourselves experience that if we're always seeking contentment. Because if we're always seeking it, if that's the point, I'm never satisfied now, I'm never content now, I'm always seeking it, you're going to miss out on all the things around you that actually provide you a small feeling or glimpse of contentment, which then would shift the identity of someone seeking contentment to someone experiencing contentment. And it'll create that cognitive dissonance of like, wait, no, that doesn't make sense for me, because my goal in life is not to have experienced it or to be experiencing it. My goal is always to, to seek it, to find this perfect life, this perfect reality. But obviously that's not possible because perfection does not exist. So yeah, this is something that I'm kind of working on, and I wanted to talk about it a bit, explore my thoughts. I'm still working on it, so I haven't like fully embodied it. It's something I'm still trying to understand and conceptualize for myself, but I wanted to talk about it in case anybody else is struggling with it, in case anybody else is going on this journey too, and realizing that, oh yeah, my identity is to always seek contentment, and therefore I'm always feeling discontent. But yeah, I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. I hope it gave you a different perspective on what it means to feel content, or what contentment means, or, changing your purpose in life. I think that can be really important to shift the way you see life too. If you want to work with me one-to-one and talk about these things in more detail, you can book a call with me or some email guidance. I also have a Substack where I write about these topics, and you can also find all my other content on my social media accounts, everything's listed in the show notes below. But other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.